Hello, good afternoon. I'm coming to you live from Rio de Janeiro. I'm Will Sullivan, your host today. And for those of you who have not met me before, I started this broadcast a little close to a year ago because I love to talk about leadership. I love to talk about kindness. I love to talk about empathy. And this show was created with the intention of me being able to introduce those who follow me to people who inspire me. So today's topic is about leadership. And before we get going, I want to make sure that everything here is working. I'll be looking down at the comments every once in a while. Let us know where you're tuning in from, because this has just become such an international community of people that tune in, want to meet change makers, leaders, those who have a story to tell. So tell us where you're coming from. Are you team live? Are you team replay? Because many of you do watch this later on, and I hope you do share this. Okay. Today's topic is about leadership. I talk about leadership a lot. I talk about empathetic leadership. Kindness is necessary in leadership, and it's a superpower. And I'm thrilled to bring up here on stage Bret Packard. You just don't get a greater leader than Bret. I'm going to bring him up so he can tell you his story. And I hope if you're not following him, you start to follow him. So let me bring up my good friend Bret. Hello, Bret.
Hey, Will, good morning to you and fantastic day to everybody watching around the world today. So it's we both Will and I appreciate the time. We know that you're giving up something. One of the main leadership lessons is that whenever you have a meeting with somebody, understand that they're giving up something else they could be doing to tune in, and we really appreciate that.
Yes, I think it's great, and I'm just flattered and honored that you joined me here today. So, Bret, this I took from you, and I took it from your profile. I think it's super interesting, and I really have a few. I have a few questions that I'm going to ask you, but I really do hope that the audience engages and puts their questions in the comments as we go forward. But the thing that strikes me about you are someone. It's funny, before the show began, I feel like I've known you forever. I've watched your work, I follow what you do, I enjoy your content, but today was the first time we ever were able to do this, in person
Mhm.
deal. What I loved about you, and I'm bringing it up here on the screen, you have so much experience, decades, and I hope I quoted this correctly, 30 years of experience in 30 countries. So start with where you are tuning in from, or where you're live from, and your story. I am sure everyone here is going to want to know
Okay, great. Well, you have that right. So it's actually 29 and a half years, but round
that.
up to 30. That's
Rounding.
fine. Hey, what?
Rounding.
So I'm today, right now, I'm coming to you from Las Vegas, which is where my wife Lori and I live full time in Las Vegas, Nevada, North America. We, I it, back in, so I'm from the U.S., from Oklahoma, and after attending university, getting my degree in banking and finance, I basically started my career in Las Vegas back in 1987, and this is where it all started, and this is where we wound up, and in between those two Las Vegas bookends, we lived in San Francisco for a number of years, San Francisco, California, and then we've lived in Singapore 3 times, and
Wow.
kind of serving up and down basically 12 countries in Asia Pacific, with a base in Singapore 3 different times, 2 different banks during that tenure. Then we spent a few years in the UK, living in London. And after London, we lived in Dubai, and I then covered a lot of countries in the Middle East, kind of the Northern African belt, some of core Middle East, Pakistan, obviously the UAE, and then down into Africa, several countries in Africa. And I actually lived in Zambia. My wife was still in Dubai at the time, but I actually lived in a hotel in Zambia
Wow.
for a year, and ran the largest bank in the country in Zambia at that time. And then after that, I basically they gave me total oversight for Zimbabwe, Botswana, Zambia still, Namibia, Mozambique, and Tanzania. So basically operated in all of those countries. So when you add it up, Will, that number is exactly 30, the number of countries that I covered. So I have those people that know me know that when I talk about a particular topic, I've actually been through it myself, and that's really the geographical patch that I've been in. So very blessed, very blessed. In the Asia time, I missed the one country that we lived in the longest, which is Japan. Lived there 6 years, based in Tokyo, but traveled and had oversight for the country as well. So for the country distribution and product in Japan.
It's just an incredible background. Two things come to mind. You must have a wonderful wife, right? She has to be into the traveling around, because without you can't do that alone, or you can't fake traveling the world. So that goes without saying. And
yeah, I mean it's been a partnership, because basically, while I was doing a lot of the things that I just spoke about, Lori was right there with me. She actually gave up her career to support the family and support what I just spoke about back in 1998 when we went there. And she basically ran the household. She took care of the finances. She took care of a lot of the personal stuff so that I could really focus on making an impact. And at age 52, we both decided to step away from corporate life and focus on caretaking. And we did that for 6 years for parents, and did that as well. So we've really been on a full journey of living in airplanes and hotels to caretaking for elderly parents.
I know what that's like, having to before my parents passed. No, I know that very, very well, and I think that speaks to the kind of person you are. And one of the things that I love about your content, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. One of the things I love about your content is on various social media, you take, and correct me if I'm wrong, you take, I think, notes that you've written or thoughts, and I love how you do use the international, when you were in Japan, when you were elsewhere, you have notes. Could you talk about how you started doing that? Because I find it super fascinating.
Yeah. Have you heard of Jim Rohn?
Yes.
So Jim, many people have heard of Jim Rohn. For those of you watching, and please do tee up your questions like Will mentioned, but for those of you that Jim Rohn is Tony Robbins. He was Tony Robbins' mentor. And basically you can see him all over YouTube, but that Tony Robbins gives public credit to Jim Rohn for forming what Tony Robbins is today, which is fascinating, right? So anyway, Jim Rohn, back in 1988, I was fortunate to have Citibank at the time, send me to one of his seminars, and basically went to one of his seminars. One of the things that Jim Rohn always talks about is keep a journal. Don't trust your brain. Don't treat it like a filing cabinet. I think, to quote him perfectly, is what he says here. Write it down. And so basically what I do share, Will, is, so basically I kept a journal for roughly 29 years, 28, 29 years from the time I learned that, just being a young, gullible kid saying, okay, he said to do that, I'll do that. One of the advantages of being young and trying new things, right? And that's one heck of a library. So basically, I write about concepts, real experiences that I went through. It's all nonfiction. It's all, and I write about a lot of things, Will, that maybe I didn't handle them the right way. That's where the learning comes in. And maybe you would handle it differently. But hey, what people are seeing is authentically real, and exactly what I went through.
What you just said, I think that, this is your story, but your story I realized I was a leader until very late into my career. I was someone who just worked, and I did circle. So am I freezing on you, Bret?
A little bit, but I'm tracking you. I think we're okay now. It's probably a
Okay. Yeah, I just see swirls every now and again.
okay.
So I didn't, today's topic is leadership. I've been drawn to you because I've just loved your stories, what you just shared. And you've always just struck me as this kind leader, right? The kind of guy that I would have loved working with, on a project and a job. And so, but I didn't realize I was a leader until very late in the game. And it was with experience and through many mistakes. And hey, we're all human. And any leader that tells me that they've never made a mistake, that's red flag territory. So I wanted to ask you some questions, and hopefully
Sure.
the audience engage with the questions. So I wrote down three
Mhm.
to ask you your opinion because of one of my favorite quotes. I'll start with that, is from Warren Bennis. Becoming a leader is synonymous with becoming yourself. It's precisely that simple, and it's also that difficult. The pandemic made me step into myself. I looked at what I'd done for almost 40 years of work and career, and I have a definition of leadership, and I talk about what I would love to be able to do more of. I want to ask you though, my one of my three questions: what makes someone a great leader, in Bret's opinion?
Fantastic. And the answer that I'll give you will be short, sweet, and I will guarantee everybody watching this that they won't find it in a textbook. so so basically my definition of a leader will of a great leader, I also call it off frequently a relevant leader, because a leader's job is to
Mm.
really be relevant to those that they serve.
Right,
Otherwise, why be a
right,
leader? We can talk more about that later. But
exactly.
basically, my definition of a great leader is a person that is able to shape an ecosystem or culture, okay, where each member of the team can perform at their potential, period.
Right,
A saltwater fish cannot survive in freshwater and vice versa. I think everybody
right,
knows that, right?
right.
And so, what often happens today with poor leadership, Will, and it really got exposed in the pandemic big time, is that people say, well, okay, this is saltwater, you're a freshwater fish.
Yes,
I don't need any
true.
freshwater fish.
Absolutely the
So,
truth.
so you go away and I'll just recruit more saltwater fish people just like me. And that, by the way, that type of mindset is one of the reasons why diversity, people don't really understand the value of diversity, which is basically to have a variety of talent around you and not just people that say yes to the boss or no to the boss, people that are able to exploit their own potential. So to me,
Exactly,
that's what a great leader does. So in other words, back to my fish analogy, and then
exactly,
I'll shut down
exactly.
here. My fish analogy, a great leader changes the water. They don't change the fish so that all the fish can prosper. Does that make sense, Will?
Great. I never heard it that way before. That's a great way to think about it.
Mm,
Absolutely.
great.
I love, totally makes sense. I'll share my, I'm with you, and I believe
Everybody, I don't know if I'm live online or if Will is online and I'm offline, but I'll sit here and happy to. Please do tee up your questions, and hopefully we'll be reconnected again soon. So at any rate, I hope that you found that. If you are watching me, I don't know if I'm just talking to myself or not, but if you are watching me, I hope that leaders out there are aspiring.
Okay. There.
I
Something
will.
just went. Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I was talking to the crew, and I don't know. I told them that I don't know if I'm talking to myself or to them. I have no
We'll
idea.
see
But
in the
anyway,
replay.
we're back here, so no problem.
Okay, good. So you were minding the shop while whatever happened to my
Oh,
computer.
whatever. Yeah, just rambling a
I,
bit.
no, I'm sorry for the technical difficulty here, but so I was starting to say before technology stepped in, with what makes someone a great leader, I was thinking about becoming a leader. I learned more from my teams, right? I always thought of myself when I was a leader to be the conduit, someone to put shape, someone that was in between. But you're taking what your goals are from leadership and what needs to be done, but you're also sharing that and hoping that when with the team is going to help bring that out. You help create future leaders, but I believe if you're that leader that's open to all of that, you become a better leader because
Yeah.
you're able to listen to the team. So talking about the leader changes the water is just, now it's something that I will never forget, and I never heard it put just that way. My
Yeah.
second
Well.
question for
Oh,
you,
sorry. Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead. Yep.
number two here, and I'm having technical difficulties. Yeah.
That's okay. I can hear you.
Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead, and then I'm going to ask the second question. Didn't mean to cut you off.
No, no, I think we're good. I basically totally agree with you, and I just wanted to mention to everybody that I was
I'm
not.
in a different
Can you hear
location within
me?
my apartment.
Yeah. Can you hear me, Will? Anyway, I'll assume that I'm talking to everybody live here, and what I was just going to say is that Will had also mentioned at the beginning that it took him a while to learn leadership. It took me 19
Yep,
years
I can hear you.
it took me 19 years, Will, to learn 19 out of my 30 years to learn what leadership is. And what I didn't know for 19 years when I switched from an American company to a British company is that the ecosystem was providing a lot of leadership, and I was an expert manager. I was good at the technical stuff, the processes, the compliance, the
Right.
rigid day-to-day
Absolutely.
operations. But the
It
soft
does take
skills,
time. I
yeah,
think you can't just walk in.
yeah, precisely. And so the soft skills was definitely something that I was lacking, and then had to develop 19 years into my career, so that things like empathy, things like looking at a job or group of jobs to be done in terms of through people instead of just through processes and different things like that. And that's really where leadership comes into play. I think we may have lost Will again, so I'm sure that he'll pop back in here in a moment. But so the analogy I like to use with people is that it's like a smartphone. Okay. A smartphone, we all know the feeling when you get a new smartphone. You open it up from the box and it's a piece of hardware. But if you turn on that phone and that software or that SIM card's not there, it's not going to work. And leadership is really that software that makes the phone work. So you need both. You need both leadership and management. And that, think about that analogy for aspiring, those of you aspiring to be a leader. Think
Mhm.
about, you've got to work on the software, the empathy, the kindness,
Right.
how you do things, not just what you do, in addition to the hard skills, knowing your job content, knowing the laws and the regulations, knowing that stuff as well. You got to have both. Hi,
Hey,
Will.
Brett. Hey there.
Yep.
I keep popping in and out. This happened to
Okay.
me on Erica Warfield's show
It's
some
okay.
months back.
Sometimes that happens, but hopefully I gave them gave the audience some great wisdom there during the commercial break.
Now, up on the screen, how do you spot a future leader? Were you talking about that while I was somewhere in cyberspace?
No, I wasn't. I was talking about the prior subject. But
That's
how do
good.
you spot a future leader? So,
Mhm.
I, Um, I'd say that it's an art, not a science, because I've always believed that leaders are not born; leaders are can be developed. And so I think that how do you spot a future leader? I always use something, Will, that somebody did with me, which is to take a chance on people, right? So if people, I believe that performance, okay, is critical in any business, in personal life. Performance is vital. So, for example, there's two elements to a performance. One is attitude, and the other is hard work. And so I kind of use that as hygiene for evaluating performance. And if somebody is performing well, I'll take a look at them, um, to be a future leader, understanding that they're going to need training and development, because once they step into a leadership role, they don't know how to lead
Right.
necessarily, right? They're used to being an individual contributor. So they might need, they will need some training on how do you inspire others and fit the Brett definition of leadership that I spoke about earlier.
So I was, and you know my story, and those of you who don't know
Mm.
my story, working at the Met for as many years that I did, I was always in the public realm. So I was
Mhm.
always part of these very large teams. You're welcoming millions of people a year into an incredible space. And I never thought I was going into leadership, right? I worked in retail and I had management jobs, and through the years, I was in situations that I was just placed in. Somewhere along the line, someone must have spotted a leader in me, right? I didn't say, "Oh, I'm going to be the leader and I want to take charge of this." And so when I started to understand that and understand,
Mhm.
oh, if how I could make things work, deliver the goal, but be a human being. Um, for me, on this question, similar to you, you see different strengths and you see different um, abilities in people, but they may not all be the same. I've worked for
Right.
people who are looking for the same type of leader, like carbon copy. I found
Mhm.
as a leader, the most exciting thing was like, okay, now we're in a new time. There's a new challenge. There's a new business developing. How do you find the new leader for that new thing?
Right.
I think there's an energy there that you pick up. And I have found it to be true that many of those that became leaders didn't know they were the leader. I'm kind of paying, I always thought of it as paying it forward. Someone saw something in me that I did not know was there.
Yeah.
And that
That happened
was
with
fantastic.
me. Yeah, exactly. I mean, my career was elevated a few times, based on exactly that. And so I create the same opportunities for others.
That's great. Now, my
Mm.
last question, and then I'll go back
Mm.
to the comments, and I hope my internet is stable enough.
That's
Um,
okay. Yep.
you may have talked about it as I was popping in and out on cyberspace. When did you realize you were the leader? Right?
Mm.
Like I knew I have a specific date and time in my mind. I knew. When did you know you were a leader?
2008. And one of the things I mentioned, when you stepped away there was, with the internet problem, was that I had worked 19 years for an American company in Asia Pacific, and the United States, and I thought I was a great leader. I switched companies to a British company, had a couple thousand people, which is why I changed the job, because I had oversight for a couple thousand people. And Will, a few weeks into the job, they weren't responding to the things that I had done for 19 years. And I came to realize through the help of my boss that actually hired me, and he was blunt with me. He took me to dinner and said, "Brett, I hate to tell you this, but you know, you're a great manager, but you just don't seem to have the soft skills required for these people to follow you. So if you have an open mind, I'll work with you." Anyway, his name was Mike Amato. Mike worked with me, and I was wide open, to the constructive feedback and development. And basically, a year later, I wouldn't say that I'm an expert leader, and I'm still not today, by the way, But I knew that I was a leader then because people were responding, people were following what I did. And I'll give you an example, Will, of what really satisfies me. I haven't been to Zambia in the past decade. Okay, more than a decade. I have people that send me a text message in the morning and say, "Good morning, Brett." These are people that were cashiers for the largest bank in the country when I was the MD, the CEO of the country, managing director, and they still remember how I made them feel more than a decade. And for them to take time out of their day to still remember that, that really touches my heart. And that is an impact and a legacy. And so when I started doing things like that, so my advice to those watching that are aspiring to be great leaders, think about what are people going to say about you, about how you made them feel
Mhm.
10 to 20 years from now? Are they going to text you in the morning? Are they? And this is several people, by the way. This is not, you can ask almost anybody that worked on our Zambia team. They all feel this way. It's
That's
amazing.
wonderful.
Yeah.
That's absolutely wonderful. It's that human part of it.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
love that response. I can think of a few times that as a leader, I love what you said. If I'm understanding it correctly, you're still developing as a leader, right? Like
Right. Even
I would,
today.
we're never done. Just
Right.
we're just never really done, and we're always supposed to be learning. We're supposed to be growing. I can remember clearly horrible time, and it's happening now in so many sectors where people are losing their jobs. There's layoffs, and having to deliver that message for the first time on a large
Mhm.
scale, and it was a large department. I've talked about this before. It was gut wrenching. Like had to be the person there along with the system to deliver this news to dozens of people would that I'd worked with for years.
Yeah.
So, you have to do what you need to do. But I clearly remember going into a room to have to speak to, you know, probably 100 people, and I threw the scripts away. I had all that I needed to convey in my head, and I knew what needed to be said. But I thought the worst thing I could possibly do as the leader of that organization at the time was to
Mm.
stand there and read bullet points that were typed out by legal or someone. All good stuff that needed to be conveyed. But I realized in that moment, okay, this my job is bigger than what I need to do is bigger than myself, right? This
Right.
isn't about you, Will. You are in a role and you need to convey what happened. So it kind of threw that piece of paper away and had everything within to deliver. And in that moment, I realized, okay, leadership is, it's not about you. You have a
Right.
role to play because there are those that depend on you. And that
Mhm.
was such a defining moment for me, and that was in the late 2000s.
That's fantastic, Will. And I've had to let go of probably hundreds of people. If you added it up, I don't count
It's
numbers like that,
always
but
an awful thing you have to
I could
do.
go check the journals and tell you. But anyway,
I'm
I
sure.
think that I think that the point that I'd like to make on this is that it's really, you know, all leaders will eventually have to do that. Zoom yesterday, who's been resilient throughout the pandemic economy, let go of 1,300 people. A lot of people before
Right.
yesterday didn't think that Zoom would be firing people either. So, Apple's the only remaining big tech Silicon Valley firm that hasn't let go a lot of people. So, all leaders have to do this. So it's really the way you do it. What I always did, Will, is that in addition to what you're saying, which I completely agree with, is that I always thought about and encourage my teams. Okay, the way we let people go, let's make sure they can find a job somewhere else.
Right.
Okay, let's make sure they have the
Right.
support and all of the things required because they still have to feed their family.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm looking through, I'm catching up. I believe my commercial breaks, as you so politely put it, my commercial breaks may have wiped out some of the comments. So I'm scrolling through the comments now to make
Okay.
sure I'm not missing any questions. There was one earlier that I want to ask you. There was a gentleman who asked a question here in the comments. Do you In all 30 countries where you worked and lived, did you speak all 30 languages?
No, did not, didn't need to. I was operating at a high enough level where I had translators and that type of thing. And many of them were English speaking countries, and many of the employees that worked for the companies at that time wanted to learn how to speak English. So actually, they didn't want to work for a local company; they wanted to work for a foreign company, and English was a big reason why. I had one person in Japan actually didn't speak a word of English, but I promoted him and he learned English in a year. You know how he learned it, Will? He didn't take a course. He watched Bloomberg TV at the time in Japan in English and learned it that way. It was just amazing, some of the people that I've had the opportunity to work with that just take an initiative like that. He'd watch an hour of Bloomberg every day before coming to work, and he learned
That's
English a year later. Yeah.
That's really, really incredible. I'm now living this life, as you well know.
Hmm.
I'm living part-time in Rio de Janeiro and part-time in New York. And so I've been here since the beginning of December, and I hope to be back in New York by June. I've I'm the guy, and I've been doing this for years, traveling back and forth
Hmm.
personally, but living here is very different. And I'm finding it difficult to speak Portuguese, although I understand it. I don't speak it just because people want to practice their English. But I sometimes feel as though I'm just being impolite because I'm not speaking enough Portuguese, because my default is to go into Spanish, to Spanish. My default is to go into English. But I
Hmm.
just find it so, so very interesting. And I can't even imagine how how do I put this? When I think of the experience, right, the two of us have had, I stood in an iconic great hall, the Great Hall of the Met, for decades. And I
Hmm.
welcomed the world. So I stood in one spot and there were all these people coming into this incredible building, and I got to meet the world and I got to work with the world, because so much of New York City is made up from people from all over the place. So I feel completely lucky and blessed that I picked up all of these cultures and mannerisms and niceties and all this kind of itty bitty stuff that add up to big stuff by being immersed in different cultures, but I never moved. I can't imagine what it must have been like for you to have traveled the globe and pick up. So I guess that long
Hmm.
beginning to my question is, what would be the number one thing you learned from 30 years of being in 30 different countries? What would you say in a concise way?
Yeah, one word: listen. Learned a lot about listening, and I didn't know it right away. I went over in 1988 to Singapore for the first time, which is somewhat westernized. I wouldn't say it's Western, but English is primary language in Singapore, but it's incredibly diverse. So I went over there and started talking to there are 12 countries. I had a regional job, and I was brought over there to build sales processes. And I remember talking to Taiwan and getting on the phone, the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Australia, all of these places, right? Hong Kong. And after 2 weeks, Will, I felt like I was just going to sink. It's like, wow, I always thought the typical American go over there, Asia's Asia, all the
Right,
same. And
right.
but boy, they're very different. So I learned after 2 to 3 weeks that I better study up on culture. I'll give people an example here. So learn to listen is the answer to your question.
Great.
Okay. And
Love
observe.
that.
Business cards in Asia and Japan as well, they're sacred. If you go in and meet somebody and slap a business card down on the table, you might as well go back to the airport and fly out, because you have personally insulted the person that worked so hard to earn the title on that business card. Just get out of the country.
Right.
And I could tell you in North America, you go in, you meet people, six people, three on each side of the table, everybody slaps down their
Yeah.
business card and you start the meeting.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is a personal insult in
Wow.
Asia if you do that, as an example. So you learn to observe, you learn to listen. If you make a mistake, you don't. You in Japan, you don't put chopsticks in rice because you don't stick them into the rice because it means death. And so the etiquette with how you eat and different things that way. So in Korea, you eat with metal chopsticks, which requires a bit more skill than the wooden chopstick. So
Very
there's so many
good.
things about culture that I would just say that keep an open mind. I would recommend that everybody learn about these cultures. You described a lot of what you learned, Will, and there's so much of the world to see out there, and it's really beautiful if you take the time to understand it.
Absolutely. I'm now, I think, working through the energy part of all of this in leadership. And we have a question that I'm going to bring up on the screen.
Sure.
I'm now starting to realize what I've done from an instinctual place is to feel the energy in a room. And I really talk about this, and I'm trying to study it more. I grew up part of an extremely large family. My mother was the youngest of 9. There were dozens of cousins around, dozens of
Wow.
aunts and uncles around. So I always picked up energy, and I always realized that there was more than one opinion, let's put it that way, an Italian American family, mixed with an Irish American family, lots of opinions and lots of differences. I also grew up as a Roman Catholic, Irish, Italian American. I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood. So my worldview from a young point of view, and I grew up in one of the suburbs or one of the boroughs of Staten Island, one of the boroughs of New York, and which was Staten Island. And so I saw the world as very, very different. And then going into Manhattan and seeing more of the world. But what I'm starting to understand is that I was drawn to energies, and I want to use my energy for good. I'm talking about all of this leadership, and it's about energy. There's a question here. So that's how I see what we were just talking about. I listen, yes, listen and feel that energy. You can feel the energy from someone by looking them in the eye, that
You can.
smile, a gesture. You know when you've hit the mark, you know when you've done something wrong, and you pay attention to that energy. Okay, so Karina has a question here. Do you think that the definition of the best leader was influenced by your traveling to the 30 countries, or was there an intrinsic external component? Like,
I
would you
think
be the same leader without it?
Yeah,
Is
I
how
mean,
I'm
I'm not going to give that a yes or no. I would say it was heavily influenced by that, but that wasn't the only thing. Because a lot of what the definition of leadership that I gave Will earlier today. Thank you, Karina, for a great question. Um, it was partially formed by having multicultural experiences, but actually that definition it's universal in nature. And if you look at a lot of the problems. Will brought up the pandemic, what COVID did economically in the United States. There's a big problem called the Great Resignation, where people have become fed up with irrelevant leadership. And it's actually caused people like me to have two names for leaders. One is relevant and the other's irrelevant. Used to be, it was just a leader was a leader, but not anymore, right? Leader, LITO, leader in title only. Okay. It is a big reason for the Great Resignation. Another reason is profits before people,
right,
instead of the other way around, people before
right,
profits, which I learned
right,
in the UK and Middle
right.
East and Africa. And so I would say that it's pretty well universal in nature, and it does apply. This ecosystem and the saltwater, freshwater fish analogy I used pretty much applies everywhere. But how you do it is influenced by the culture.
That's incredible. I can't wait to watch the replay of this and jot down these nuggets that you've shared. Another question from David
Mhm.
Hansen. How do you handle situations when you make a cultural faux pas, Brett? And how did you know you made a mistake in the first place? The rice example is one that's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is to number one, David. Great question, thanks. Is be humble in what you do. I received some advice from a leader, one of my bosses actually, that always said, Bret, when you visit another country, understand that you're a guest of that country, and your purpose in visiting that country is to help develop the local staff so that they can take over your job. And every job that I've had, Will, over the 30 years, except for one, um, I'm proud to say that I have left that in the hands of local staff. So I've been able to develop the people or appoint the people if they're already developed, hired the people, replace people, done all sorts of stuff, removed. I'm very good about removing toxic leaders as well. If anybody ever wants to talk to me about what does it take to do that, I'm an expert in that, because that's one of the first things you have to do to clean up, is to get rid of the toxic people that don't value diversity and inclusion, for example, and a lot of the values that Will and I are talking about. So, David, I would say that how did you know you made a mistake in the first place? I think if you go in with that attitude of being a guest and being very open-minded and listening well, then I learned to I talk a lot about elite performance in what I do, and elite performers around the world in every culture, they do three things really well. They prepare, they trust their preparation, and they just do it. They get out there and do things, and they're not afraid to make a mistake. So that second one, a lot of people, David, spend their entire life preparing. They're a full-time student, and they're studying. But when it comes time to applying that, they then begin to question, can they do it or not, even though they've studied the topic. So that trusting the preparation is something that's important. I was always able to trust myself. And if I would fumble, I'd admit that I fumble. I was humble enough to admit it, like I did 19 years of my career. We talked about that, and then move on.
Brett, you strike me as someone, you would be the leader that I would have been drawn to throughout my career. I love a leader who can say, I don't have the answer to that. Let's
Right.
figure it out. And you learn early on in your career, when you have the leader who thinks they know everything, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
You're in
Right.
big trouble when they want to answer every question.
Exactly.
And
I mean,
so being
yeah, exactly.
humble, I love
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, and you gotta, and it's important, because actually knowing everything is a disadvantage. Knowing everything is a situation that I was in 19 years into my career when I got over, switched companies from American to British, and I kind of thought that I knew everything. Hey, I just got this big job, 2,000 people oversight, and I was thank goodness I was humble enough to recognize that I had the hardware down. I had that smartphone, but the software wasn't working, and I needed to program my own software. And if you're humble, you can do that.
A quick story, and then we have a question here from Eugene,
Sure.
which I want to bring up on screen. A question for you.
Yeah.
I realized I had some years back switched and had more responsibilities, worked on a project, and switched departments. I went from one department thinking, sure, I've done this for so long, I know what I'm doing. I went with a different group of people, and I'd realized, you're in a different spot. You're with a different group of people. You're with a different set of
Mhm.
rules, I suppose.
Right. Yep.
Certain game. And do you know that I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing today, or been able to unlock my life in such a way, had I not worked with these people and gone through the pandemic with these folks. It
Right.
changed my life, and who knew? I went in kind of thinking I'm a know-it-all. I can teach everyone so much. They taught me way more, and I was able to leave, a better person for having been their leader. And so to be able to do that is just incredible, and to
Yeah, and
share that.
one thing we didn't. That's a great example, Will. And one thing we haven't talked about was that I also led through three different big crises. The Asian financial crisis, 1997, actually in 1998, a year later, they tapped on me to go over to Asia when that happened. Was in Japan in the aftermath of 9/11 when people couldn't access their money. We had imposters putting detergent on cashier counters, making us think that it was anthrax, and all sorts of, people trying to exploit just an awful, tragic event that happened 9/11. And then I was in London during the global financial crisis when that hit as well. So I think going through those crises and problems, very complex problems, tends to also build versatility into your leadership capabilities, so that when something like a pandemic comes along, you actually know how to handle it. And I handle adversity. I handle crises through something I call AQ, which is adversity quotient. A lot of people talk about IQ, EQ, emotional intelligence. I'm an expert in AQ, adversity quotient, and what does it take to build a strong adversity quotient. A lot of people haven't heard about such a thing, but there's three things that you do. And this is some advice I'd give to aspiring leaders as well, and current leaders. If you want to be relevant, work on your AQ. Number one, don't blame yourself for whatever happens. Number two, don't blame other people. The blame game does not solve a problem, especially when you're responsible for other people. And number three, understand that whatever it is, the pandemic is the current one, everybody can relate to that it can be dealt with, okay? And it's limited in scope and duration. Right. Don't let it, as bad as it gets, don't let it consume and give you a negative view on the world. If you focus on those three things, you'll have a stronger AQ. And when a shock happens to the system, you'll be able to, it'll kind of bounce off of you, and you'll be able to continue to go forward, because your people are looking to you when you hit choppy air, just like when you're taking a flight from New York to Sao Paulo. There's some choppy air, and you're trusting that pilot to kind of navigate and get you there safely.
And the crew to make sure they're calm, right? They're conveying.
Right. No panic.
Now, here's the question from Eugene. Bret, as a leader, what challenges and resistance have you faced when trying to implement your vision to improve and make an organization move an organization forward? Steps you take to ensure there are no roadblocks. Yeah. I think I know how you're going to answer this, but I really want to.
Yeah, so I would say, Eugene, that the number one thing, I mean, most of my experience, actually all of it, is in large organizations, and the blunt answer to your question is middle management. Okay, not all middle management. So if some of you are in middle management, you're listening to this, I'm not necessarily talking about you, but in general. Any organization has resistance to change, and these are people that typically don't perform. They blame others for the performance. Their sole mission,
right?
They're very too comfortable. And one of their missions in life is to outlive their bosses, which tend to rotate in and out. And so how do you overcome something like that? What I used to do when I'd fly into a country, I'd say, and there'd be all these meetings set up in the headquarters and all this stuff as well. They're going to give a presentation. I would tell the driver, take me to a branch. I want to talk to people that are dealing with customers before I go to, and there was panic, right? It was a panic because what in the world? He's going to a branch. What's going to happen, right?
He's off script.
Yeah, that's right. I remember one time going to Cairo. It was before the uprising, actually. So during my time in the Middle East, and I said, I want to go to Alexandria. And they said, well, that's a vacation destination, Bret. You know, I said, yeah, but it's also the furthest branch away from the head office. I want to go there and figure out what's going on. Then we'll have these meetings at the head office and you could tell me how great you're doing. Right. And so I would say that to get around this, Eugene, to the back end of your question, the steps that I would always take is I would apply something called ALA, ask, listen, and act. I would ask people that are doing the work, what are your pain points? What's going on? What can I do to help you? The L is to obviously listen, take notes. And then the A is the action. So based on what they would say, I would also then tell them and negotiate with them, okay, if I do these three things for you, these are the three things I need you to do for me. And we'd negotiate, probably agree on two of them. But then we had tight engagement, Eugene. And that tight engagement, we kind of got around middle management that way. And then eventually we would clean out the middle management and replace them with more relevant leaders.
Somehow, Bret, I think we're related. I mean, really,
We probably are.
somehow, some way. I mean, we speak the same language. We've been in different, industries and in different parts of the world, but really, really have that same kind of approach. I'm being mindful of time. We've gone a little bit over than what we would normally do. Just scrolling through to see if there's any more comments and questions. But as we're coming to an end, I wanted to put up on the screen. We've got great question, Eugene, from my good friend Grace. Bret, we had our version of the Will and Grace show in New York. Grace and I worked at the Met. She moved to the West Coast. I flew down to South America. And we really became close during the pandemic. Going back to what you're saying and crisis, you're thrown into a situation. There's no playbook. How we were part of a team that helped reopen New York City after a 5-month lockdown.
Wow.
There aren't books written on that.
No.
And what do? You use your presence, you use your connections to people, and you grow. And I think if the pandemic didn't happen, Grace and I would probably be having lunch at the Met right now. But things happen, and we change, and we grow, and we seek new challenges.
Isn't it amazing? You talk about a relationship, a tight relationship between Grace and yourself formed through a crisis. And that's something else that I could tell. I haven't even met Grace, but I hope to connect with Grace after this session. But I can already tell that she's a great leader. I know you're a great leader because that's what happens, is that a crisis, because if you're not a great leader, then a crisis will bust relationships. And, because people remember how they're treated when times are bad, especially. When times are good, they might remember, but when times are really rough, they're for sure going to remember. And I think it's great that you two have bonded.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. And like you said, there are so many people from my past job, even other organizations, right? To talk about a crisis, I was inside the Met. You don't get much bigger than the Met in the United States or in the world when it comes to a museum, right? It's this huge organization, and I was in a bubble. Here we were, part of this huge group of folks, other cultural organizations around the city, figuring out, how do you do this? Government officials, health experts, trying to do what is right. For me, I think what changed me the most was for the first time in my career, was able to focus 100% on the well-being of other humans, right? You have to deliver results and money and revenue, and that's all part of what I did. But it was the first time in my life that it was about a year and a half, I would say, 2 years, where you're solely focused on the well-being of people. And through that, it changed me. And knowing, okay, that I want to do more of this, in the sense that, okay, I have to talk about this. I have to figure out, how do I go out there and find that kind of energy? How do I get them part of conversations with people like you to say, I never thought of it that way, but how can I play a role in making sure the world has more relevant leaders? And that's a mission. That's just such a mission. Grace is giving me compliments in the I'll blow her a kiss in the chat. I won't put it up on screen because that's a little egotistical. And I love what Abib has said. It's all about people first mindset when it comes to leadership. If you, and I think of this, and we'll wrap it up, and I'm going to give you the last words here. If you're not putting your people and your clients first, right? It's your people first, then your clients, and then you figure out how to get the revenue and all the other stuff. That, to me, if you don't build a sense of trust in team, you can't deliver anything that's great or lasting. I don't know if you disagree with me, but absolutely positively, the world needs leaders who actually care about other human beings, is all I have to say.
Yeah, and I think in the 1970s, mainly in the US, the kind of the Wall Street mentality became popular of deliver profits and shareholder value at any cost, right? And that even today, I mean, that's what's driving the Great Resignation in the US. But I can tell you, you go over to Singapore, and they are profit driven, but they put people before profit. So there is a different way to do it. I've transformed organizations, flipping from profits before people to people before profits, thanks to an individual I mentioned named Mike Amato that has just written a book and released a book on this called A Better Way to Win. And this basically what you do, if you put your people first, okay, there's still a way to deliver, but it's how, and you have to deliver or you're gone. Okay.
Right.
So people, you can't just put people before profits and not deliver.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
and it all is in how you deliver. And just a
Right.
short thing on, well, what does that really mean, Brett? Well, everybody gets a goal, and usually 90+% of companies, the boss sets the goal and you deliver the goal or you're gone. Right.
Right.
Well,
Right.
there's another way. Everybody's got to have a goal, but why not tool up like we did your people and let them set their own goal? Okay. Everybody's an adult here, right?
Right.
They're getting paid, and you tool them up, and everybody has a different potential. Will has a different potential than Brett, et cetera, et cetera. And why don't you tool them up, let them set your own goal? We did that in the UK and produced something like 3 or 4 times higher results when we allowed people to set their own goal, because it was self-imposed pressure rather than tops down pressure.
Exactly.
So a lot of it comes down to how you do things. It's not necessarily what you do, but how you do it. So putting people before profits, that's a simple example of something that we did that has amazing results.
This here, I suppose, and really, we have a couple of minutes left. Eugene came back with another question, and I think this might be a good way for you to bring in some of those who have watched us today, for you to bring in what leadership means to you. So Eugene's question, Brett, as an organization gets larger, there can be a tendency for the institution to dampen the inspiration. I think to keep control on things, if I understand you, Eugene.
Right.
How do you keep this from happening? How do you keep that inspiration flowing and that energy flowing?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Eugene. It's practical. It happens all the time. And so number one is you've got to deliver. So to attempt to change an organization and not deliver, you're going to be gone before you can even implement your program. So you've got to, so one of the things specifically, a specific example would be that I believe strongly in that every team needs to have a group of elite performers. These are the best people in the market. They're worth paying a premium to because they can help cover you and deliver while you're fixing a lot of these chronic problems. And basically the bosses, the institution, as you mentioned, they're going to be happy as long as you deliver, but do the right thing. I had a boss in Japan. Her name is Joyce Phillips, and she always spoke to us about do the right thing all the time, every time, for every customer. And if you do those things, that's great. But you can't just go around preaching that. You've also got to be delivering. So while you're teaching people how to do the right thing all the time, every time, for every customer, and creating that salt and freshwater mixture so that everybody can, that takes time. And I've always been able, Eugene, to use elite performers to actually give me some air cover while I'm conducting this operation.
Well, that's wonderful, Bret.
Yeah.
I can't believe the hour's gone by. Sorry, I popped out a couple of times, but
That's okay.
I'm sure you're the pro. You certainly kept the show on the road.
We'll see what the replay shows.
And here, I believe the best way for people who's watching this to reach you is through LinkedIn, I suppose, and they can DM you and be in touch. So
right.
You get the last word. Anyone watching this, wanting to be a better leader or to become a leader, what's your advice to them?
I would say to think about the freshwater, saltwater analogy. Instead of changing out people, which is the easy cop-out answer, think about what can you do to create an environment where you can get the best out of all of your people and hold them accountable for performance. And if they don't perform, they're gone. But you will find that if you work on that ecosystem, because an ecosystem informs behavior. A lot of people think, Will, and my advice would be that you don't hire people with good behavior. The ecosystem informs behavior. And this is where most everybody misses the boat. This is why you have half of the workforce in the United States that's doing something called quiet quitting, which, by the way, I believe that they're squirrels. They're not humans. You know, humans are meant to grow, right?
Yes.
Squirrels survive. They're busy in the summer preparing food for the winter. And quiet quitters are doing the same thing. So don't be a squirrel. Get out there, find an ecosystem that you can grow. Okay. And if you're a leader, think about how can I create an environment? If Will is great at marketing, then why don't I get Will in marketing? And if Brenda's great in sales, then why don't I build an ecosystem where Brenda can be the best she can be at sales? And if Bret's a great accountant, then take him out of sales and put him in accounting. You know, this is what leaders do, where you can get the very best out of your people.
Well, thank you so much, Bret. Something tells me I'm going to have you come back. We had a
great. Let's do it.
Comments here, active chat, and I really, there's anything I can do to help bring stronger leaders and have these conversations about what leadership is, you know where to find me.
Fantastic. Good. Keep up the great job, Will. I admire your work as well.
Thank you so very much. I'm honored to have had you as a guest today, and I'm looking forward to more of your content. And everybody who's watching, make sure you connect with Bret. He's just got so much to share, and you'll all learn so much. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye-bye. Have a great day.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay. Yep.
Bye-bye.